לפי דעתי בודה עדיף, אני הולכת להחליף. או זה. גם טוב.
ורדה, אנחנו מעדיפים אותך.
מה?
אנחנו מעדיפים אותך. למה? בסדר. שחרלה. היי, וגילה. הילה.
טוב.
Good morning. Good morning, Geshe.
Good morning.
Good morning, everybody. So welcome back to the class for the second day of Geshe Kelsang Wangmo 400 stanza, of Aryadeva's 400 stanzas. Before we start, I would like to make a short announcement. Just to say that the first class will be until 11, and also to remind all of us that we can perform dana. So the address for that is in the chat, and also to thank Gila and Loda and of course Geshe for editing the wonderful text we have the chance to learn today again. So with no further ado, and I hope I didn't forget anything, please.
Okay, great. Thank you, Eduardo, for that. Well, since we have little time, let's start right away. Well, first of all, setting the right kind of motivation for this class as well as for the entire day. Today, I'd like to, start in the same way as yesterday. That is, we do a little bit of breathing meditation, followed by setting the motivation, doing a little visualization only to inspire us. But instead of, and then the prayers are initially the same, refuge and bodhicitta, then the four immeasurables. But instead of citing the Heart Sutra, I would like to do a little prayer that is only 7 lines long, and it's described as the seven limb prayer. It's said to be a very effective way, well, to accumulate merit, but also talking about Buddhist psychology, very effective in generating positive states of mind that help us in the process of, well, transforming our mind. The first one being kind of bowing, but bowing down doesn't literally mean physically. Here it's a mental state of like opening ourselves to something new, and then making offerings, giving something, giving to, well, our teacher, for instance. If we have like a spiritual teacher, like talking about someone like His Holiness the Dalai Lama or His Holiness the Karmapa, etc., like any realized Lama, making offerings, well, bowing as in like opening ourselves to them. Aryadeva, of course, being one of those incredible Lamas, mentally still being around, maybe not in the form he existed, but still around. So making, well, prostrating, that is like bowing, opening ourselves to their wisdom, making offerings, generating regret for our mistakes, rejoicing in all the good activities, and then requesting those great beings to remain among us, and to teach the Dharma, and then eventually at the very end to kind of dedicate whatever positive potential we've accumulated going through these 6 steps, while accumulating the merit, dedicating that merit towards our own enlightenment. So usually when I teach a longer course, I like to do this at the beginning, and again, just allow everyone to reflect on the meaning of each line. And as with the 4 measurables, I take a short break. All right, so let's do this together. There are not a lot of prayers, but only just to set the mind in the right direction to prepare it for Ayadeva's text. So let's start with some breathing meditation. Now, in order to be inspired, visualize in the space in front of you Buddha Shakyamuni, who's wearing the robes of a fully ordained monk, seated in the full lotus position, radiating pure light, which is symbolic for his great wisdom and his great compassion. Reminding us that we have the potential to reach the same state of enlightenment or awakening. And then surrounding the Buddha, the great masters whose scriptures we still study nowadays. Nagarjuna, Aryadeva, Chandrakirti, Shantideva, and so forth. All of them inseparable from our own personal spiritual teacher. And surrounding the front visualization, as well as the ourselves, are all sentient beings. Trapped in their individual sufferings and with all their problems and their difficulties. And now in the presence of these great inspiring beings, as well as the presence of all suffering sentient beings, let's generate the mind of enlightenment. That is the determination to purify our mind from all that's not in the nature of our mind, from all hindrances, negative emotions, and so forth. In order to reach the awakened state of a Buddha. Not for our own welfare, but for the welfare of all sentient beings. May today's classes here, may they also become one of the causes that will eventually result in our own enlightenment. And now holding on to this motivation, possibly, if possible, throughout the entire day, not forgetting we've generated this. Let's first cite the prayers, starting with refuge and strengthening the mind of enlightenment, bodhicitta. Okay, thank you. I take refuge until I'm enlightened in the Buddhas, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the positive accumulation I gather by listening to the Dharma, may I attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. I take refuge until I'm enlightened in the Buddhas, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the positive accumulation I gather by listening to the Dharma, may I attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. I take refuge until I'm enlightened in the Buddhas, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the positive accumulation I gather by listening to the Dharma, may I attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings never be separated from happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. Then the 7-limb prayer. No, I believe it's, if you scroll up a little. Oh, no, maybe it's not in there. 4 measurables should be.
Please go to Eduardo. Please go to the discourse prayer book. You're not looking at discourse prayer book. Thank you.
Yeah. Yes. There's there are prayers at the beginning of this.
Yeah.
If you just scroll, go to the,
Page 2.
Page 2. Great, there it is, 7-limb prayer. Yep, almost there. Go a little bit further up. Up towards the beginning. I think it's probably before the Heart Sutra. Yep, there we are. Great. Okay, so as I said before, I'll give you time to reflect on each line. Reverently I prostrate with my body, speech, and mind. And present clouds of every type of offering, actual and mentally transformed. I confess all my negative actions accumulated since beginningless time. And rejoice in the virtues of all holy and ordinary beings. Please remain until cyclic existence ends. And turn the wheel of Dharma for sentient beings. I dedicate all the virtues of myself and others to the great enlightenment. Okay. All right. Now, continuing with the text, Ayadeva's text. Well, I'm aware it's not easy. Well, it's not hard to understand, but especially the second chapter, it's not easy to kind of apply this. It sounds pretty, well, depressing maybe, like there's just no pleasure, it's not real pleasure and so forth. And in particular with regard to what Aryadeva says here, well, he talks more about physical pleasure. There's actually a difference between physical and mental pleasure, happiness. Well, this morning, Michael Müller, he sent me this little video clip and about from this scientist who differentiates between pleasure and happiness. Now, I'm not sure I totally agree with what he says because, well, in the sense that the explanation here in the Buddhist context is slightly different. But I guess in everyday life, we do differentiate between pleasure being more physical, whereas happiness is more mental. Oops. Pleasure. Oh, can you hear my own voice? Anyway, so pleasure referred to the body, referring more to the body, whereas happiness referring more to mental happiness, if you can call it that. Anyway, so definitely from a Buddhist point of view, we are interested in mental well-being, which is more important, which dominates also physical well-being. And now he kind of puts it nicely, differentiating between, or distinguishing those two aspects. So pleasure, as in like more physical pleasure, it has to come from the outside in the same way as, well, Aryadeva talks about it, our body, in order to have a physical, pleasant experience, well, that has to come from the external, like food and drink and temperature, etc. Whereas happiness is something that comes from within. And here, again, happiness in the sense of not just the short satisfaction. If there's pleasure, if there's physical pleasure, then there's possibly a short sense of elation, if you like, on a mental level. It's not that type. It's not that type that is dependent on the physical, but is rather a type of satisfaction and contentment that comes from within. So where the physical, anything relating to physical pleasure is short-lived, this kind of deep sense of satisfaction is long-lived. He differentiates that way. And the physical has to do with taking, receiving from the outside, whereas the mental kind of state of satisfaction is giving. Likewise, you need external substances. Again, you need something from the outside for the pleasant experience, versus the mental experience. You're not dependent on external factors. You experience the physical kind of pleasure on your own versus the mental kind of satisfaction and happiness. That depends. It's done in connection with other people, so connected to others. And then he also differentiates between the chemicals, dopamine versus serotonin. And he also talks about the first type, the one dependent more on the physical, leads to addiction, versus this deep sense of contentment does not lead to addiction. And he explains it with these chemicals, dopamine, leading more likely to lead to addiction versus serotonin. Anyway, it's definitely an interesting presentation, which may help us to understand these ideas in a better way. However, the point is nonetheless that what Aryadeva is saying is basically look at the goals you set yourself in life. What are you looking for? So oftentimes our goals in life are directed at, well, pleasurable experiences with regard to the body, but also, of course, with the mind. The sense that, well, we seek this lasting happiness, and there's a sense that external objects can give us that lasting happiness. I've read a few like questionnaires. People ask, like even in the modern days, they ask young people what their goals in life were, and two things stood out. One was the wish to become wealthy, to make a lot of money, to have a job that gives them sufficient material wealth. And to be famous, to be known, I don't think this reflects whole of society, and there are other things that people also wished for. But what was interesting that those two, I think it was a Harvard study on happiness. I think I read about this in this context, that a lot of people are interested in, well, material wealth and also being known, being either famous or being liked. And that reflects again the Buddha's description of the 8 worldly dharmas, where we're attached to. I mentioned them yesterday. I didn't speak out. I didn't use the name, the 8 worldly dharmas, but being attached to profit, to gain, I should say, gain, pleasure, fame, and being liked, being praised by others, versus disliking, being attached to the absence of the opposite. So loss, being attached to the opposite of, losing money, being attached to not having displeasure, and so forth. And that way, these 8 factors, and we're driven by those. And especially when it comes to the modern media, the media like TV, of course, the internet, commercials like advertising, which is always there. It's on a subconscious level, it actually influences us more profoundly than it used to be, because it analyzes our own behavior, especially when we're online, and then basically presents commercials that are in accordance with our own preferences. So in that way, basically, it seems to suggest at all times that happiness comes from external sources, first of all, that it relates to the body. A lot of it has to do with, physical kind of gratification. And this is what Aryadeva is basically denying, that what he's refuting is saying happiness coming from the body, this is not even called actual happiness. It's not even called, I'm sorry. I meant to switch this off. It's not even called actual happiness. It's just a brief moment of no trouble, no physical trouble as such. So he's saying actually having this body is a huge burden. We don't realize it because we don't know any different. But carrying around this load, this physical load, it's just a burden. And so this cannot lead to lasting happiness. It's in fact, eventually we try to overcome having a body like that. And instead, it's just the mind. The mind is most important. And even talking about a mental type of body, still having a body, but just not this limited form. So he's very much emphasizing the limitations of this entity we have right now, the body, that none of the experiences we actually call pleasant are actual pleasure, because we compare in comparison to what true physical bliss is, this is nothing. And then, of course, the goal is to experience mental well-being. That's most important. And as it was described, well, it's a long-term, it's long-term well-being. It doesn't come from the outside, it comes from inside. And it's in connection with love and compassion, in connection with positive emotions, does not lead to addiction. It's a very natural process. So this is what we're aiming for, but we can only aim for it if we stop being so attached to this ordinary sense of happiness where we believe external factors that we spend all our time and energy pursuing. When we stop that attachment, because in the end, there's no time left to pursue real happiness. All right. Now, if we go to verse 40, we have a little bit left in this chapter. So just to explain you those last verses before we continue to the next chapter. Now in verse 40, and how about this? Where did we get to yesterday? I think we finished 40, didn't we? Did we finish 40? I believe we did, yes. So in 41, he then says, though powerless, oh, here we go. Though powerless, the combining of all the elements produce the body. Thus, it is not at all proper to call what is incompatible pleasurable. Now, this is kind of limited Buddhist science at the time, which of course nowadays we have a lot better explanations of what makes up the body. But in actuality, well, there is a way in which also modern scientists would agree to this explanation given here, that with regard to the body, it's composed of 4 elements. But these 4 elements, when we say water, earth, fire, and wind or energy, well, that doesn't literally mean like a solid piece of this and so forth, like earth, of course, not in a literal sense. It's just certain properties in the body in terms of the earth element. It's those hard elements. Then liquid elements. So for instance, blood and other liquids in the body. Likewise, warmth, of course, like warmth in the body, a certain temperature in the body, as well as energy that is created in the body. So in that way, it's kind of a very simple description of what the body is made of. And here you're saying these are actually incompatible, as in like water and something dry. I mean, they have contradicting kind of functions, and so it's incompatible, if you like, and they can actually harm each other if one is out of balance, etc. So in that way, this body is not a perfect body. And I mean, we just take the scientific explanation, well, there's a lot that can go wrong in the body, that does go wrong all the time. Our body is extremely vulnerable. Anything that is out of balance right away creates diseases, etc. So this body is, of course, it's very sophisticated in its way, but it's far from perfect. And so there are a lot of factors in the body where they can actually, these different aspects can actually harm each other. So how can we expect this body to be so perfect and pure and be so attached to it? Which again, this attachment is on a deeper level. Intellectually, we feel, okay, this body is limited, etc., but it doesn't feel that way. And I'd like to again encourage you to get in touch with this sense of like, this body is so precious, and the attachment we have to this body, and of course to the body of other people as well, but that's more dealt with in the next chapter. So he says here in 41, the body is composed of 4 elements which actually are incompatible. Therefore, this body cannot be called pleasurable in itself. And then in 42, he says, when there's never that which will relieve cold and so forth, it is not at all proper to call being destroyed pleasurable. So for ordinary beings, there is nothing that can completely relieve cold, hunger, thirst, and so forth. So these aspects like food, heating, and so forth, they're merely means to reduce the different types of suffering that are associated with hunger and so forth. So they're not means to pleasure, but they're means to produce, that is to reduce problems. So there's nothing which will really relieve cold and so forth. Now, our body at any time can experience cold, hunger, etc. It's so vulnerable to those. And there's nothing that can totally eliminate the possibility of experiencing those problems again. I guess we've not experienced enough physical problems to really relate to that. But all we need to do is be locked in a room for like 48 hours and no one taking care of us. Then I guess we get more of a sense of the body being so extremely needy and so vulnerable, needing so much from the outside that we can usually provide it. I mean, throughout our day, we eat 3 times, whatever we do. But all these external factors, they can only temporarily take care of things. So much of our time is really spent on taking care of our body. I mean, we can't meditate for long because there are aches, because we have to eat, because we have to take a shower, because we have to sleep. The fact we sleep so many hours, I mean, we don't know any differently, and we may be really happy to have those whatever 7, 8, whatever hours we sleep every night. But the point is, from the point of view of actually spiritually transforming the mind, generating more love and compassion, things that we really have to practice, our body keeps us from doing that. We have to look after it like we have to look after a little child over and over, and this child never grows up. In fact, it grows younger and grows more dependent. In that, we have to take care of our body more and more the older we grow. So it's a huge burden we carry around with us. And there's nothing we can do to get totally rid of hunger, to get totally rid of the fact it grows smelly, etc. There's nothing we can do. We can only temporarily take care of it. So we may experience this pleasure when we eat, but it's not real pleasure. It's just a short relief of the fact that we get hungry again in a few hours and we have to again relieve the body of that. So we're constantly relieving the body. We find relief in feeding the body just for short periods of time. Okay, so then it goes on to say in 43, when on earth no action is done without exertion, it is not at all proper to call performing actions pleasurable. So someone may say, well, but there's so many actions the body can do, so they're pleasurable. But again, every action we do, it requires effort. No action is done effortlessly. So again and again, we always have to make an effort. Yeah, so it seems as if we didn't have to make an effort, but we do. We need a lot of energy. And again, we need to produce this energy. And a lot of energy that we have to produce doesn't go towards our, meditation, towards transforming the mind, as long as we have to carry this burden around with us. Of course, it is valuable as long as we have it. And that's what the first verse said. However, the way we cherish the body, we look after it, we spend so much time on top of what we need to do anyway. We spend our whole life dressing it beautifully, dieting, and so much time is spent towards something that doesn't need that much, whereas our mind is so much more important. Now, here it's saying, if you think your body is so great because it performs these actions, well, all this exertion it needs. So when you're really sick, just raising your arm, you realize, oh, how much hard work is that, because you're really lacking the energy. So see how much energy you actually need when you're sick, just to turn your head. People who've had COVID-19, they talk about, I know, in fact, 2 Tibetans who have it. One lives in Germany, one lives in Switzerland. And they talked about, like, wow, they can't do anything, just talking to someone. They don't want to talk to anyone because it requires so much energy. Now, this is the energy the body usually takes. And if that energy is drained, well, you can no longer do the simplest things. So therefore, they're not pleasurable. Activities are not pleasurable because they're actually already require this exertion. And then in 44, it says, in this life and in others, always we should guard against ill deeds. Calling them pleasurable is not at all proper when they're bad transmigrations. Now, having this body is already a burden. It's already hard enough. And in certain ways, if we give in to our attachment to the body, it keeps us from practicing properly. But then on top of it, if we engage in negative actions using this body to insult others, to push others out of the way, to be in whichever way. I mean, our body is the way to communicate negative actions. So to use this body in this negative way, well, then we create further negative potential to then be reborn, maybe with a body that causes even more trouble. Right? So to be aware of that, let's, for our own sake, to not have to carry around this burden any further, and to be able to focus more on inner happiness, inner satisfaction. Well, let's not make it worse, accumulate negativities, harming others and thereby harming ourselves. Then in 45, there's never any pleasure for humans in riding and so forth. How can that which at the start does not begin in the end increase? Now, if you read the commentary, you'll notice there are these questions that are asked. And I didn't always mention the questions, it takes too much time, but it's very interesting. It's almost like an inner dialogue that Aryadeva is having, and we could be having if we're really reflecting on that. Of course, this text is meant to as a manual to meditate. It's a meditation manual. So if you sit there and you analyze, so my body's a bad and etc. And then there's this other mind going, but, well, how about there are these pleasant activities such as riding a horse, right? I mean, even nowadays, if people who have horses or can use horses and like to ride, go out to ride, they may say, oh, the happiness, my sister had this little sticker in her room, her happiness lies on the back of a horse or something. I remember growing up, she had this little, so like riding a horse, that's true happiness. But really, if you think about it, well, this action again, it actually starts off with an activity that's not in itself pleasant. So it's where's the line? It was 40, calling it pleasurable, right? I'm sorry, I have a 45. So riding a horse. So there's no pleasure in riding a horse, like activities such as horse riding. Well, they're considered to be pleasant, but it's not in the nature of pleasure, because otherwise, how can something that does not start with being truly in the nature of pleasure, if it was really pleasant, then it should become more pleasant as we continue, but it actually turns into suffering. So if even the body itself, it requires pleasure, etc. It requires effort, etc., exertion. And then as we continue riding, it just, we start having aches and pains in the body. So that shows from the beginning, it was not in the nature, in the nature of pleasure. And we have the sense it is. And so we work really hard towards, well, having a horse, being able to ride out, and then maybe have a few hours, a few moments really, where the type of worse suffering is just not present in that moment. And we believe, oh, this is true pleasure. And we work our entire life towards those moments. For others, it maybe just, I don't know, watch TV or do other things. We work towards these short moments we call pleasure, and work our entire life, make money for it, just these short moments that are in and of themselves not true pleasure, because they require external factors, and sooner or later they turn into something unpleasant. As in, like, if you ride 2 days on a horse, you'll be so sick. If you watch TV for 24 hours, oh gosh, you'd be so disgusted by just seeing that screen and so forth. All right, then 46, thinking the alleviation of pain is pleasure is like someone who feels delight vomiting into a gold pot. So here is saying that, well, weakening, it's only weakening suffering. We weaken a type of suffering, and that we call pleasure. It's just a lesser form of suffering. So in both cases, it doesn't matter what, it's still a form of, so we just don't know this real bliss, this blissful experience that comes through meditation, for instance. I don't know whether I talked about this. No, it was in a different context. But I've mentioned this in different classes before, that through meditation, just through ordinary meditation, such as mindful meditation, which means meditative focus, like when you concentrate, like you engage in stabilizing or concentrative meditation, that you are able to generate a certain type of pliancy or flexibility of the mind, which leads to great bliss. So there's already a state of bliss which comes from the inside. You don't need to have a, I don't know, huge flat screen TV or 3 or 4 horses or anything. No, it comes through our own development of the mind. So to seek out these qualities, you can have much greater happiness. And even though it's still a worldly type of happiness, still the type that is not said to be in the nature of happiness, but it's already so much greater. So we settle for so little, are satisfied by working our butts off just to have these little pleasures that don't last long, and they're actually not in the nature of happiness whatsoever, though it feels that way. So to work towards internal happiness gives us so much greater satisfaction. And the time and energy we spend on one, well, we have to spend on the other too, but it's still more worth our while. Okay, so therefore, it's like our experience of happiness right now, it's actually a type of suffering. So it's like vomiting into, I don't know, into a bucket versus vomiting into a golden vessel. It's vomit after all. So in other words, it's suffering after all. It just kind of looks really nice and it seems to be real happiness, like riding a horse or whatever it is, going shopping and going to the beach and all that. So we work so hard towards it, but it's just vomit in a golden pot. It's vomit after all. It's a little coarse, but never mind. So 47, by beginning, it stops the produced. How can pain that begins be pleasure? It seems the subduer therefore said both birth and cessation of suffering. Now that's a little hard to understand. That's like by beginning, it stops the produced. Okay, now let me just explain this. So when the discomfort, for instance, and I explained that before, I talked about this carrying a boulder, for instance, a load on your right shoulder. So for a long time, it becomes intense. It becomes really intense. And you have to move it to the other shoulder. Now, if you move it to the other shoulder, which in the beginning, there's merely a slight pain, which is beginning, right? And it stops the intense pain already produced. Okay, so you switch the load, the boulder, whatever, the load from one shoulder to the other. Now, in the beginning, the intense pain that was already produced with the other shoulder, now that stops. But it's not that there's no discomfort at all, okay? But in comparison to what was there before, there's a relief. So how can there be pleasure while a new and different pain is beginning, right? How can there be pleasure? And just because the intense pain that's associated with this shoulder, now that has stopped, but it's not like blissful in itself. Maybe there's just a short moment, but before long, it stops being pleasant and again, pain arises. Now, if in the beginning it stops this worse pain, but there's already some pain, how can that be pleasure? And so the subduer, here's the Buddha himself, he therefore said that, okay, so birth, beginning of something and the end of something, you can't really separate them. So the beginning of one thing is the end of something else. But within samsara, with this ordinary body, no matter what it is, birth or the beginning of something or the end, the cessation of something, both are in the nature of suffering. But we choose, for instance, in the case of actual birth, this is something totally positive. Death is something totally negative. Well, in and of itself, it's neither. However, the way we experience it with this mind and body, of course, it's in the nature of suffering, right? So either both of them are in the nature of suffering. And of course, why? Why? Just because we have this basic misconception. It isn't mentioned here, it's implied here, but might as well mention it at this point, just to remind us, it's of course there's a holding on to an unrealistic self, because we constantly hold on to a self here and we worry about it, and there's always like a sense of of impending dangers. Something is going to happen. I have to protect this. So we're trying to protect something that is totally unrealistic, that just doesn't exist, that kind of self we project. And that gives rise to attachment to the self, attachment to mind, anger, and so forth. So as long as we have these emotions, mentally, we cannot experience true peace and happiness. And physical, of course, this body is just the result. It's the result of these negative emotions, etc. It's an expression of that, if you like. So that's the body that was created by our mind, in that the karmic imprints that were left on the mind in a previous life, well, they were responsible for connecting our mind with this body, which is totally limited. Now, it's of course to do with our mental state. And Aryadeva is just saying, move away from all the physical, all this just being obsessed with the external, this, that, and the other. It is fine to enjoy them, but enjoy them for what they are. It's not telling us, well, be depressed about life because it's all suffering. No, see it for what it is. Reduce these unrealistic expectations when it comes to horse riding and going to the beach and going shopping. Well, we can enjoy them for what they are. Short-lived cessation of worse suffering. That's what it is. But if I know that, I'm less attached to them. I see them for what they are, and I'm okay because they stop. Of course, you can buy beautiful things, and a day later, that kind of elation, it's gone. You can go to the beach, you'll be happy for a few hours, but just enjoy it for what it is and realize for lasting happiness, we have to work on our mind. There's just no other way around. Okay, but going to 48. If common beings do not see suffering because pleasure disguises it, why is there no pleasure which obscures suffering? So right now we may think, as common beings, we may think, well, there is real suffering, that there is real suffering, but it's concealed by pleasure. We may actually say, well, there is actually not that much suffering because our pleasure disguises it. Now, there could be, we think of suffering as like really terrible, the worst type of suffering. That's what we identify as suffering. You know, like with the temperature, as I mentioned before, we don't know what it feels like. If hypothetically, we didn't know what it felt like to be in a room that's got 22 degrees. If we've always lived in a really cold place, to us, plus 5 degrees would be very, very warm. Minus 15, all right, that's cold. But plus 5, that's really pleasant. And we never strive towards experiencing these 22 degrees. Well, this is similar here. Our mind has the potential to experience deep satisfaction, lasting satisfaction, without any worry, blissful experiences. Our mind has that potential, and having that experience, which is so pure that attachment can no longer set in. So we will not be attached. It's just we just experience it for what it is without holding on to it. Our mind has that potential, like experiencing 22 degrees. But since we don't believe in this, we don't know of it, we hold on to those 5 degrees and settle for so much less, and don't make the effort to enhance our mind, in that we remove from the mind what is extra. And this is what he's trying to do here, Aryadeva. Remind us in our daily life, because even if you're a Buddhist practitioner, it's very difficult to go up against these states of mind, these misconceptions that are so deeply ingrained, we're so habituated to them, that they will constantly suggest to us, even without being aware, well, seek this, seek more success at your job, this pleasure, buy something new, oh, it's on sale, how wonderful, I'd like to have that, and in the sense that this can actually make my life better, really. Okay, so therefore, understanding, well, yes, it can, of course, make things better, but before long, we go back to the ordinary. It's not like my life is so much happier because I have that. No, In fact, I may have so much stuff now that my life has become more complicated because I have to look after it. I have to insure it. I have to clean it and so forth. All right. But going back, therefore, here he's saying, what we see, we believe there isn't that much suffering because even those +5 degree, we don't recognize that they're actual suffering. And we think that this is pleasure, which disguises the worst. But actually, that's not the case, he argues, because he says there is no pleasure, there is no real pleasure we experience that actually disguises suffering. There isn't that type. This kind of happiness that does, this kind of pleasure that does exist, mental or physical, it does exist. However, we don't experience this. So actually, suffering totally outweighs. So the greatest suffering that we could experience always outweighs the greatest pleasure we can experience, just because the greatest pleasure is no real pleasure. So therefore he says, why is there no pleasure which obscures suffering? In that really there's even the greatest pleasure, it usually doesn't disguise. We still experience suffering. All right. And then 49. Common beings must be told you are not free from attachment to suffering. Certainly Tathagatas therefore have said, this is the worst confusion of all. Now, even though our mind and body are not experiencing what they could potentially experience, Buddha needs to tell us that we're attached to suffering. Okay, you're not free from attachment to suffering. Well, actually, that's the worst. That's one of the worst types of confusion. It's actually bizarre. It's actually quite weird. Like, we don't have to be told that the sun is in the nature of heat. We just know that. No one needs to tell us the sun is hot. In general, I mean, everyone who's educated, well, anyone who's, well, that's got some common sense, know the sun is hot. Knows that water is its nature is being wet. However, we have to be told that our experiences are actually in the nature of suffering. Why? Because we hold on to our state as being great, as being the way it should be, and we believe some external changes could actually make us alive. Okay, if we just had that lover, if we just had that raise, if we just had better house, better building, we believe it's just these external factors, and this is all already there, but external factors could just make it perfect. Now, impossible. You can add as much as you want from the outside. No way will you experience this deep sense of satisfaction. Well, physical bliss, but also this internal lasting bliss, physical bliss, as well as this, more importantly, this internal deep satisfaction that no matter what, the satisfaction does not go away. That is what we can experience. And that is what we sacrifice in every moment when we spend all our time and energy pursuing something that's actually in the nature of suffering. All right. And so last verse now. So therefore, for 49, that's the worst confusion that we hold on to, this limited state we're in, when we could do so much more. We could do so much more. There are lots of examples that could illustrate that. You know, we had the opportunity to get the university education and everything was wonderful. And all we just want to be a servant. We love being a servant. If you take like an ordinary example, it's like someone gives us the Buddha is basically telling us this is what's possible. Get the greatest education, and we're like, no, I'd like to be a servant, right? It kind of feels a bit like that. Okay. Then 50, the impermanent is definitely harmed. What is harmed is not pleasurable. Therefore, all that is impermanent is said to be suffering. Now, what it says is here is like whatever is affected by the misconception of reality. In that case, being impermanent, well, it gives us harm. It harms us. It actually, the fact that things are changing, on top of the fact that there are misconceptions that are responsible for our experiences, our misconceptions, and of course, certain emotions that anger, hatred, and so forth, well, therefore, this change actually harms us. Therefore, all that is impermanent and that is influenced by our misconception, that is said to be suffering. And yeah, we live in an impermanent world. Our minds are affected by these negative emotions, and therefore our lives are very limited. All right, now this was the end of chapter 2. It's a little difficult because, well, we feel our lives already so hard, etc. And then all this negativity, it may seem very negative, very depressing, but actually it isn't. It isn't negative at all because it's not telling us don't enjoy life. I mean, enjoy it for what it is, but seek for more. Understand your mind is so incredible. There's so much more you can experience. And just through a little bit of practice, all we need to do is practice a little bit. If we practice a little bit, there's a little bit more satisfaction, not an external satisfaction, but an internal one that is not affected by external happenings. And how wonderful is that? No matter what happens around us, if we already create a deeper sense of satisfaction through our practice, well, it's kind of the greatest protection anyway, and we're less dependent on external factors. And then we just increase that. But for that, we need to spend some time and energy. And that time and energy can only be taken from the time and energy we usually need to satisfy ourselves with trying to get some external satisfaction from external objects. Whereas it's our body and mind, because of our negative emotions, is just in the nature of suffering. There's nothing you can do. You need to make changes from the inside. Okay. And then you can still enjoy things for what they are, but you naturally don't want to spend that much energy on these objects. All right, let's do a meditation on this. We've already done one yesterday, but it's always different just listening to it versus to internalize it. Okay, so as before, this is just before we move to the next chapter. So as before, we'll start with a few moments of breathing. So just let go of any disruptive thoughts. Just focus on your natural breath. Relax into your breathing. Now try to get a sense that external objects can give us happiness. Try to get in touch with your own innate belief that external objects such as going to the beach, watching a movie, getting a pay raise, and so forth, that they actually give us some happiness. And a sense that this body in particular can experience true pleasure if certain aspects from the outside are provided, such as food, drink, the right temperature, and so forth. But how can, in particular, this body be a source of pure happiness when it's actually composed of factors that are in themselves very vulnerable? Whether it's the 4 elements that are incompatible, they may actually harm each other. Or having a body that, if some aspect is out of balance, the entire body gets sick. Our body being so fragile that even a tiny virus can totally disrupt its functions. And there's nothing from the outside that can permanently relieve us from hunger, thirst, being cold, being warm. We can only be temporarily be relieved from those experiences. There's nothing from the outside that can stop us from being tired, getting sick, feeling hungry, thirsty, and so forth. And any action we perform requires so much energy. It always requires exertion. So the more we're focused on the body, the more energy we use, and the less energy we have left for internal transformation. And if activities such as going to the beach, riding a horse, or any other activity we believe to be pleasant in itself, if it was that, the pleasure should grow stronger. And should not turn into suffering. However, the longer we lie on the beach, 1 hour, 10 hours, 20 hours, the greater our suffering. Therefore, any activity we consider to be pleasant, any worldly activity, we consider that to be pleasure, while actually it's merely a temporary cessation of a worse suffering. And although our experiences right now, due to our basic misconception on the nature of suffering, we constantly need to be reminded of that. As if someone had to constantly tell us that water is wet. Because of one of the worst confusions, worst misconceptions we have is that we believe that which is in the nature of suffering to be real pleasure. And spend all our time and energy to pursue that pleasure. So that we've got no time and energy left to work towards our inner development, which is the only way to lasting peace and happiness. Now, to conclude this analytical meditation, whatever insight you've come to, now use the stabilizing meditation to focus on that and to allow this insight to become subtler and affect your subtler states of mind. Okay. Then Aryadeva in his next chapter is called Abandoning Belief in Cleanness. Now, that is slightly difficult as well and can be easily misunderstood, which is why it's, I guess, quite important to understand the context, understand why it was taught. Now, whereas previously we dealt with our attachment to our own body, attachment to our own, well, to our own life, to an ordinary life, which is quite limited, in that way, keeping ourselves from something great. Here it deals more with our day-to-day attachments. Because on top of being attached to ourselves, attached to our mind and body, and, well, attached to that which we perceive to be pleasant while it isn't, and so forth. Well, likewise, we are attached to external objects. And here the type of attachment, well, there's so many different types. It's like, in fact, we get attached, usually if you watch your own mind, we get attached right away to just about anything. And the strongest type of attachment, I guess, or the strongest type of desire also is the desire towards another person. In particular, sexual desire is very much mentioned here. But we need to, we need to take into consideration also other types. So attachment and desire, craving for other things, where what is important to understand is how attachment, that is, first there's craving, and then that leads to attachment, how those minds function. So to identify this in our own case, the moment there's craving, so what is craving? How does it actually arise? I've mentioned this before. I mentioned the misconception of reality in the case of, well, ourselves, of course. Mainly there's a sense that there is some I there. There's something other than mind and body. There's something independently, objectively there, which I call the I or the self. And not just that, it's happiness, it's well-being. That is, because it is, well, the sense that there is something there, and the sense, the mind kind of believing that there's something there, and the mind having that natural wish to be happy, well, that then leads to an attachment to the I and an attachment to my happiness. And that kind of attachment, what it does, is it perceives something truly there, something that is not just labeled, not just called, not just that I say I, when my body moves, I label I on the basis of this body. No, I believe there's another entity that is moving when my body's moving. And this entity, I believe that to be more precious, more important, and its happiness more important. And I exaggerate its importance in that I believe this is truly there and it's truly important. Now I exaggerate its importance. Okay. And that then leads to other negative emotions. It leads to, well, first of all, exaggerating its importance in that I believe there's really something there. And then I hold on to that. I hold on to the I hold on to its happiness. And then I do the same with regard to other things. I perceive the world around me. And in relation to me, if it seems to help me or that which is mine, my happiness, then I consider that to be in and of itself positive, in and of itself great. I no longer see any negative aspects when there's craving, in particular, just before there's craving. So I just perceive it as positive and as important. And I believe these positive qualities are within it, not just labeled, but they're truly there. And therefore, I hold on to them. I want them. I need them. So you see this process of first exaggerating, giving phenomena, kind of ascribing phenomena a mode of existence, some independent, objective existence. And then believing in relation to myself, I've done that already with regard to myself. And now how does it relate to me? Does it harm me? Does it benefit me? Or does it do neither? And then in the relation to that, actually it's a total relative process. In relation to that, I now call it pleasant if it benefits me, unpleasant if it doesn't, and neutral if it doesn't do either. If it's neither benefiting me nor harming me. And after I've done that, then again, there's misapprehension of reality sets in, and there's a sense it's not in relation to me, it is just in and of itself, positive, negative, or what have you. And the stronger I associate it with myself, the stronger I now crave it. And this craving sets in when I see it as really positive, as in and of itself. I exaggerate its mode of existence in that I truly believe this to be pleasant, and therefore I want it. The more I consider its negative aspects, the lesser my attachment. But if I only focus, the moment I only focus on this helps me because it's led to pleasure. So if it's given me some pleasure, then this pleasure I now associate it with that object. I only see that pleasure. I see it as pure, as just having no fault, and I want it. So the stronger I see that purity in the object, the stronger I see this positivity that seems to just lie in the object. It's got nothing to do with my reaction to it. It just is pleasant. The stronger my craving. Okay, so if you recognize this process, understand it first, and then recognize it within yourself. How initially there's no reaction to a certain object, but as you bring it to yourself, as you associate it with yourself again and again and again, you start seeing it as purer and cleaner and greater from moment to moment, and then your craving sets in. Now, this is true for anything, whether it's a computer you crave, a new iPhone you crave a certain building, a house, a car, etc. But most powerful is sexual craving. And this is what's mentioned here as something because it's so powerful. It's such a powerful craving, which is not just mental, it's also physical. Well, it's the only aspect, even stronger craving could be that to intoxicants. But for that, of course, you need certain chemicals to add to the body. But in terms of not adding any chemicals to the body, but rather just being having craving for a particular person, which we naturally have, well, that is the kind of blanket emotion that is presented here, but should also be taken with regard to any other emotion. So all I'm saying is this is the strongest emotion that is ordinarily available, and we can apply this to other things as well. But sometimes the stronger emotions illustrate this aspect the best. Now, here it's spoken to a person, to people. I mean, the audience of Aryadeva living in a monastery. He was, as you remember the story of Aryadeva, he lived in a monastery, he lived with monastics. There were mainly heterosexual males. I mean, I'm sure there were some homosexual men there as well, but mainly heterosexual. So his focus was on women. But and this can be so easily understood. He talks about the body of a woman when their sexual desire is considered to be clean and pure by that sexual desire, not by a different mind, but the actual sexual desire considers that woman to be pure and perfect and so forth. And again, it's a process of recognizing this within ourselves at times of strong sexual desire. Here in this case, it is women, because as I said, the majority of monks who Aryadeva taught were heterosexual males, and so it was directed at women. But it should be likewise directed at men, depending on your sexual preferences. And it can be directed at anything, any object you desire, you crave for. Again, recognize how you perceive this object as being so pure. So there's that aspect. But on the other hand, on a conventional level, we're disgusted by the body of another person, which is really bizarre. Our own body seems kind of clean and pure. Our own socks, they're okay, but we wouldn't touch someone else's socks, for instance. So, I mean, in both cases, in and of itself, it's neither dirty nor anything. However, we kind of project a type of dirtiness. You know, another person has kind of touched my food, maybe just with their fingers, and it's dirty. The whole food is dirty. So this sense of like, it's dirty, it's clean. We very much differentiate between those two. And individually, there are also differences. Culturally, of course, in some countries, you drink from the same bottle, like no way. Like in India, like it's seen as disgusting. This has, of course, hygienical reasons. That the originally those were hygienical reasons, but not in all cases. It's like you're gonna die of drinking from the same bottle. So it's a lot of projection from the mind, which is why culturally or just innately we have a sense, oh, this is dirty. Another person's poo, another person's liquids in the body. The moment they leave the body, it's like, oh, this is gross. So conventionally, there's that aspect. But on the other hand, when there's craving, we see this other person is so pure, and all these liquids we usually think they're disgusting. Well, they're still there. They're just covered by skin, which is also not in and of itself clean and sparkling. It has to be cleaned, etc. So therefore, there's this contradiction there, and this he's pointing out. And sometimes people say, well, this chapter is putting down women. It's like it's just saying the women's body are so dirty and so disgusting. But to me, it doesn't do that. It just helps us to recognize how our attachment projects something onto women that is not found there. And I believe what it also does is it shows us that women are so often objectified as just seeing the body as so clean, and then it's the body one is obsessed with. Or in the case of man, their strong craving for a man is just the body. It's like this objectification of like, there's just the body, and that's just most important. That's all we see as like this, wow, pure body. And that's just the wrong attitude. And as you continue reading Aryadeva, he talks about respect for women, seeing women, their qualities, well, in the same way as male quality, in the same way that anyone can become enlightened. In particular, in this particular tradition, I mean, there's no difference between male and female. You can become a Buddha as a woman, as a man. In the end, there's basically a different body we have, a certain attitude we have in terms of feeling more male or female. But with spiritual practice, you move beyond that anyway. You no longer feel you're male or female, and the body eventually you leave behind anyway. All right. So having said all that, I just wanted to make sure this doesn't sound like putting down women, and I will also try and read this in the appropriate way. Okay, so if we could have the first verse. Yeah. Here it goes to say, first it says, regardless of the amount of time concerning objects, there's no limit. Your exertion for the body's sake is useless, like a bad physician. So since objects of desire here have a limit, there's no limit to this time we spend craving. Okay, so no matter the amount of time, it's not like, oh, I've craved it for long enough, now I will no longer crave. No, there's no limit to it. If we start craving one thing, we continuously crave. There's no end to craving, especially because the objects we crave, there's no limit to them. Okay, so it's the craving itself. We believe, oh, if I just had that object, if you watch your own mind, there's a sense, oh, I crave this now, but when I get this object, I'll be all right. I no longer crave anything. Oh, everything, I'll be satisfied. Not understanding that it's not the object, it's the craving itself, that as long as we have it and as long as we give into it, it'll just grow stronger. And it'll always find an object to crave. And that is like a bad physician, a bad doctor, whose efforts are useless because the doctor's unable to heal. So we are craving, it's not able to satisfy anything. And we keep running after it, believing that if I just get the object, then this craving will be satisfied. But actually, it's no way. It's like a bad physician who will never heal. So however much effort you make to get the object, well, you won't satisfy the craving because that will just continue on. All right, so that's verse 51. And I'm still checking every now and then. There's no question. I'll look in the chat. You're always welcome to set something in there if there's something not clear. All right, then 52. Just as craving for earth does not stop in those that subsist on it, similarly, longing for sensual pleasure grows in people as they indulge. Okay, so for instance, there are insects who subsist on earth, who live on earth, like earthworms. Okay, so they never stop craving for earth. It's just earth, but they're craving for earth. There's always something, well, they subsist on it. It's like their existence is such due to their actions they've accumulated in the past. They're now born in an existence where they subsist on earth, and they will never stop craving that. Similarly, we as people will never stop craving sensual objects. In fact, our longing grows stronger. So in some cases, certain animals, they may crave things such as soil and earth, whereas us as humans, and here, of course, we need to look at our existence. We as human beings, it's sensual objects. We crave sensual objects. Our whole life is around the indulgence in sensual objects. Now, recognizing that, and again, it's the same process. It keeps us, all our time and energy is spent on that. So let's recognize how we do that and check whether this craving holds any truth in existence, as in like really makes sense. Let's put it that way. All right, and then it goes into, here it starts with, among all women, there's not the least difference in sexual intercourse. When others too enjoy her appearance, what use is this perfect woman to you? So again, we can say among all men, there's not the least difference in terms of sexual intercourse. When others too enjoy his appearance, what use is this perfect man to you? All right. So the outer appearance of a man or woman is actually not really that important in terms of if one craves sexual intercourse. So the stronger this craving, in the case of, like I said, one of the strongest craving is that for sexual intercourse, so sexual craving. Now, actually, even the outer appearance, the stronger it is, at some point the outer appearance is no longer an issue. And also when others also enjoy the appearance of that person, what use is this perfect woman to you? As in like, well, in terms of satisfying sexual desire. And when actually you have to share it, this outer appearance. So this is to do with the obsession with the outer appearance of a person. We're very obsessed with that. But in terms of our sexual craving, it's not important. And in terms of our well, the appearance, it's shared by others. So we actually have to share this perfect woman with others. And again, is this really something that is so desirable? So again, check your own attachment. What is the object? What does it wish for? Well, a handsome man, a beautiful woman. And again, does that really make sense? It's just this kind of argument as in like arguing with your own mind. There's one aspect that believes having a beautiful woman, having a beautiful man is important in a relationship, for instance, and here's the argument against it. Okay, to satisfy you sexually, it's not necessary to, and again, you have to share with everyone else. All right. Next, the next verse. And maybe one more thing I'd like to mention here. Of course, also what Aryadeva is talking about, or talking to, who he's talking to, are monks, and of course, as part of the physique of these male students of Aryadeva, well, there's definitely, because they're celibate, therefore, sex is much more of an issue. I mean, not being able to relieve certain desires and cravings, it may, for at least some time, be a lot more of an issue, and therefore it's emphasized more. So this needs to also be stressed, that we now need to accordingly adjust it, because our life may be quite different if we have a relation with a partner and so forth. So this has to do, of course, with age, with hormones, and of course with the living situation, in this case with men. And one danger there's one danger with this kind of meditation. Of course, I mean, there's danger with many meditation, of course, to develop a disgust for women, for instance. And this is not what we're supposed to. This is just an extreme we may go into, regard women as something undesirable and negative. This is not what this is doing. It's just saying we should respect women mainly for their mind, for their abilities, respect, of course, their body too, but not be so obsessed. So it's more about recognize your misconception, the way you look at women. Just recognize that. So it may be misunderstood, but I cannot stress enough, it has to be taken into context. All right. So now it goes on to say, whoever sees her as appealing thinks himself satisfied with her. Since even dogs and the likes share this, why, fool, are you attracted? So whoever finds a man or a woman attractive feels satisfied by him or her. But that is so completely subjective. This is so subjective. Like, we believe in that moment this person is truly objectively beautiful, man or woman. And there's a sense of satisfaction because we believe it's to do with the object itself. But actually, dogs are also attracted by other dogs and believe that these dogs having to do with their there's a sense that, oh, dogs are attracted by other dogs, and it's like, again, this dog believes this other dog is so pure, and so again, the sense of objectivity. But actually, it's totally subjective. We believe it to be objective, and actually, there's this story that's also mentioned in the commentary where someone asked this monk, "Who's the most beautiful woman, and who's the best woman?" And in answer to that, the monk says, well, whoever you find most attractive. Now, to recognize that although to our attachment, this woman seems to be objectively beautiful, it's totally a subjective kind of attitude. So to be more aware that our afflictive emotions, in particular attachment, it objectifies things even more. It has more of a sense that there's some objective beauty that I now need to get, not realizing the subjectivity. So I just see Maya ask me, I have a question when it's appropriate. All right. Okay, please go ahead, Maya. Usually I like to do it towards the end, but maybe let's have one question in between. Yes, Maya, please.
Yeah. Hey, Geshe, thank you. My question is actually two things. The first one is, I was wondering, because for me, when it's something that I'm contemplating quite often, when I was in Dharamsala, in Bulgaria, and we were with His Holiness writing the teachings, and everything there is, the weather is not the best weather, and you sit on the ground with this, fluffed plastic and crowded with a lot of people, and the food, Tibetan tea and this, Tibetan bread. And here, I have all the facilities that I need to, right? But I couldn't be more happier when I was there. How do we define this sort of happiness? Because I mean, I don't know if is it mundane? If it's not, I don't know. I keep on contemplating this, how do we put that in that context? That's one thing. And the other thing is, so we talk about, beauty as something that is part of this mundane attachment and so on, but also the images of the Buddha, or like one of the things that we are, aspiring as to have the body of a Buddha is also the beauty. It comes with it. So I was wondering also, how does that
fit
come in
into
contact
this?
with those things?
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Sure. Well, the first question, the second I won't answer right away because it's part of this and it'll be a part of the explanation. The first question relates to the previous chapter. So in terms of how come we do experience pleasure, in particular with regard to spiritual practice, is this ordinary? Yes, well, that's still samsaric happiness, but it's samsaric happiness moving towards, well, beyond samsaric happiness, in that it relates to spiritual matters. And the thing is, like, when we talk about samsaric pleasure, which is actually in the nature of suffering, and then overcoming this and experiencing nirvana, or having having reached nirvana and experiencing our mind now that is free from all these obscurations, it's not that there's one time just suffering and the next moment there's just happiness. It's a gradual process, in that this true happiness is true satisfaction that cannot by anything be disturbed. There's no disturbance from the external. It's not independent, about like happiness that does not depend on external substances. Right now, we don't have that kind of happiness. It's very much dependent on external substances. So if you're in a bogaya and someone tortures you, you will still suffer, right? So in an extreme form. So external factors still very much influence us, only because our body and mind are not in the nature of happiness. Therefore, external factors can bring forth the nature of our mind and body even stronger. However, if there's a certain degree of comfort, and I'm saying you're not starving to death and you're not freezing to death, okay, you're not getting the best food that you would prefer, or you're not getting, sitting not on a cushion, but on a piece of plastic. But the point is that you're spiritually, like mentally, you're receiving the Dharma. And it's not just through the teachings, the whole place is affected by the minds of great spiritual beings. In fact, our mind influences the places we're in, the energies in the places we're in, and other people do the same. Therefore, Bodh Gaya is greatly influenced by the minds of many great beings, people meditating in that place. So it affects us. First of all, it does have an influence on our body, on a substantial, on the level of physical level. But what's even more important, of course, is on the mental level. We're inspired by other people around us, by the presence of these lamas, knowing where we are, etc. So this is actually moving towards nirvanic happiness. It's not a word, but samsaric happiness is neither. So moving beyond, like, it's more of an internalized process. And so bringing forth this happiness, moving closer towards the happiness that is actually possible. So it is still in an ordinary sense, but it's moving away from worldly happiness. Okay, so this is how I look at it, which is why, if we didn't have that, we would not practice the Dharma. That's the beauty of practicing the Dharma, because we actually experience a new type of happiness, which, although it's still samsaric happiness, it's still samsaric in that it's still not considered to be in the nature of happiness, because external circumstances could still dampen it. However, it's a type of happiness nonetheless that is greater and deeper than what we experienced before, which then motivates us to continue practicing. So it is important, right? It's desirable. It's better than not having it. I mean, it's very important to have it, but we shouldn't be satisfied with that and go, okay, I've got enough. No, there's so much more. So it should continuously motivate us to get more. And the longer you practice, the happier you get. You ask any practitioner well, it doesn't happen on a daily basis, but ask any practitioner who's done this practice for a year, 2, 3, maybe 5, 10 years. Are you happier and more satisfied and less affected by external circumstances? And the answer is, in most cases, 99% yes. Yes, really, there's a change. Okay. And of course, we shouldn't stop there, but even that is already a huge reward. Okay. But it's still samsaric. All right. Anyway, let's continue with this and your other question. I'll try and tie in the explanation. Now, and if I forget, please remind me. Now, whoever sees her as appealing thinks himself satisfied with her. Why? Because we objectively think this person is beautiful and we want that which we believe the beauty lies within this person. And that's why I want it. If my attachment were aware that this is just my subjective perception, if that attachment were to take into consideration that this is actually my subjective perception of her, this attachment could no longer be attachment. It would right away stop being attachment. Why? Because it automatically believes this beauty to be within the object. That's why I want it to myself. If I know it's subjective, well, I want this subjective mind, but I don't want the object, if I know that. However, that's why our attachment objectifies. It believes the object to be in and of itself beautiful. And that's why if there really was, every dog would be attracted to these beautiful women. Every living being would be. But of course, we see that doesn't happen. I mean, our jealousy, that's so interesting how jealousy works, because we believe everyone. So we were like especially obsessed with this woman. We may be jealous if this woman goes somewhere where there are other men. Or in the case of a woman, if we believe this man to be truly handsome, like objectively handsome, then we believe wherever this man goes to, if there are other women, they will fall for him. So we're more jealous when this person just talks to another man or woman, depending on which gender or whichever preference. So we are jealous because we believe the other person will find them just as attractive, which of course is not necessarily the case. It could be, but yeah, well, not in all cases. All right. So that's very important to stress the subjectivity of this perception. Then it goes on to say in 55, this woman, every part of whom is lovely to you, was common to all before. Finding her is not as astonishing as it is for you. So we believe a captivating woman or an attractive woman, an attractive man, they're hard to find. And therefore it's reasonable to desire. But actually, those captivating qualities that you see are actually quite common, are more common than we think. So to us, they're special, etc. But actually, many have these qualities. So every part to whom is lovely to you is actually more common than we believe. So to us, it's like there's only this one. So we crave this one. There's only one. There's only this one guy. But actually, many of these qualities other people have too. We just don't see them in them. So we believe there are these qualities in this person, and we exaggerate these qualities we see, right? We exaggerate these qualities and we blow them up, and we believe no one else has them. Therefore, these qualities we see, we're actually blowing them up, and we believe only this person has them, so I need this person. But they're common to so many people, but we just don't see it because we don't exaggerate these other qualities to the same degree. And this woman is just as common. And usually I give an example of myself, like years ago when I was like a teenager. I remember being totally, and I told you the story many times, so it's getting old, but it's the one thing that comes to mind where I had this very strong feeling in that way, where I was attracted to this boy. He was 16, myself 16. So I thought he was so amazing. Everything about him was so special. It was so strong that even his backpack was attractive. Even the backpack he was carrying was like, whoa, what a backpack, because it was his. So nothing in him seemed common. But the qualities I saw were just common qualities, and I just exaggerated them out of my craving for him. And then this person was gone, did some exchange, went to the States for a year, and when he came back, the craving was gone. And I remember thinking, what did I see in this person? It was just, it's got nothing special, nothing more special than anyone else. But this is what our craving does. It sees, it exaggerates these qualities to such a degree that maybe even the clothing or maybe even the surroundings seem like, even his parents seem amazing. Well, just besides that, but on top of that, it seems unique because no one else around me looks that way. I mean, it's because I don't exaggerate in the same way. Right? So therefore, this woman, this man, every part of whom is lovely to me, actually quite common. There are a lot of them like that, in other words. They're not that special. We make them special. Our attachment, our craving makes them special. So finding her or him is not as astonishing as it is for you. We were like, how did I find this person so special? But actually, our mind just made up that, projected all this attractiveness onto them. And yeah, of course, then I see them as special because I don't see that in other people. But it's subjective, totally subjective. All right. 56. If those good qualities seem attractive and their opposite is the reverse, which is true, former or latter? For neither alone persists. So actually, those with good qualities seem attractive, but what about the opposite? I mean, they're just human. They must have negative qualities. They should actually give rise to aversion. But that doesn't happen because we very skillfully, our attachment, our craving, it suggests there are no bad qualities. Okay, so there's this intellectual mind, this rational mind that thinks, oh yeah, it's just a human being, must have negative qualities. But that mind is very weak when it comes to our attachment. Our rational mind is not as strong because the attachment is so much stronger. The craving is just stronger than that. And that suggests no bad qualities. Okay. So rationally, we know must have bad qualities, but it doesn't feel that way on that deep level. Therefore, there's no aversion. There's no aversion. I mean, ordinarily, if it was another person, if they did something negative, well, we would have aversion towards them, but it doesn't happen. Okay. So our infatuation for a man or a woman can be so strong that we no longer, it doesn't give rise to this aversion. However, whoever has good qualities also has bad qualities, right? Everyone who has good qualities must have bad qualities as well, because you can't have one without the other in case of normal human beings. So which one is true? Do they have good qualities or bad qualities? And of course, it's all relative. It's all relative. Good and bad qualities are only in relation to what we consider to be positive or negative, what we want, etc. Just besides that. But in actuality, we all have negative emotions and we consider them to be negative because they cause suffering and that's what we don't want. All right. And it's impossible unless we found a female Buddha here. And but then yeah, we actually, that's a whole different story. We can't have craving for a Buddha. If we see the Buddha for what the Buddha is, it's actually not possible for the mind. So we would just have a projected version of the Buddha when we crave a Buddha. Of course, we crave, sometimes there's craving, there's attachment to our own spiritual teachers, but if they're Buddhas, we don't perceive them for who they are. We perceive them as ordinary, because otherwise craving cannot hold on. That's a whole different story. But okay. So this much, 56. I'm thinking, I don't want to talk too much. I want to do more meditation. So let's meditate on that. Let's do some meditation. 10 is on my watch. Well, it's 10, but 11 for you. So 11 will stop, right? Is that right? Yep. Thank you, Shaka. Okay, great. Now let's do some meditation just on that, on what we've done. Again, we start with some breathing just to relax the mind. Just let go of any disruptive thoughts. one of our most disruptive thoughts or mental factors is craving. So, first of all, try to recognize your own craving from memory or present experience. And although it seems that craving will be stilled, will be overcome if we just get the object of craving, that's of course not the case, since craving is endless. As it always finds a new object. And in that way, these objects are limitless. And what we usually crave are sensual objects. So in the case of experiencing craving for a man or a woman, let's analyze that type of craving. Is there a sense that this person is subjectively attractive? However, if that were the case, everyone would have to be attracted by that person. Which is clearly not the case. Therefore, it's subjective. We're attracted to someone we personally, subjectively find desirable. Therefore, there's no objective attractiveness. But can you recognize how your desire or craving suggests that there is something from the side of the object that is attractive? In which we like to possess. And not only do we believe this attractiveness to be objectively existent from the side of the object, not just projected by our own mind, we exaggerate these qualities. Not understanding that many other people share the same qualities. But due to our exaggeration, we believe this person to be very rare. And we're no longer able to see any negative qualities. That if this person is an ordinary human being, definitely has. So how about aversion towards negative qualities? Well, that doesn't arise because we're only focused on the positive qualities, which hinders, which prevents us from seeing any negative qualities. And only after some time getting to know the person better, you're surprised to find they have negative qualities which previously we chose not to see due to our infatuation with that person. So now to conclude this short meditation, just to spend a moment on allowing your insight to sink deeper into the more emotional levels of your mind. Okay, we're done with the first session in the morning. We'll have a half an hour break. Am I right, Eduardo? Right? Half an hour break?
Yes, you are. Yes,
Great.
you are. Thank
Great.
you.
Okay, so see you soon.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
מאיה? מאיה, את שומעת אותי?
כן.
טוב, אחרים שומעים, זה לא משנה. רציתי להודות לך על השאלה ששאלת את גשמה, כי התשובה שלה הייתה בדיוק על דברים שאני גם רואה, שאני חווה במדיטציות, וזה היה מאוד מאוד מחזק. תודה.
תודה לך, אדוארד. נתראה ממש עוד מעט, תודה רבה.
זה גם מאוד מרגש, השאלה השנייה. הראשון גם מאוד מאוד טוב. מרגש אותי. תודה לך. ביי.
תודה, ביי.